Michael Cade. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone. Yeah, so me and Anthony sit in the same team over on product strategy. What does that mean? It's a bit about community. So these events is basically what we virtually hover around, speaking at VMUG, speaking at Veeam user groups and other user groups. But I think more importantly, our focus is around content, creating good content for the community, but also feedback from you as customers, community members, alliance partners in some ways, and then we feed that back up into our product management group and hopefully make our product, our platform, a little bit more user friendly and fill those gaps in that we're seeing out there in the field. But yeah, so that's a bit about me and I guess a bit about Anthony.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's got, obviously we would have loved to be there in person, but we can't at the moment. So everyone knows that. So we're going to try our best to have a bit of a fun hour, give you guys a bit of an update as to where Veeam is. If you haven't seen or heard about Veeam recently in terms of what we've been doing, mostly around the platform. We're not going to bore you with any numbers or anything like that, any marketing fluff. We're going to get into the product. I'm going to talk about the platform. I'm going to talk about our 2020 releases, what we've delivered so far this year, and then focus a little bit on V11, which is our flagship release that we did this year. Talk a bit about the feature set in there. Talk a bit about our strategy and vision for 2021 and beyond. And then I'm going to finish off with a little bit of a look into our public cloud offering, specifically for AWS. And there is a link there to VMware as well there, and I'll chat about that later on. And then Michael's going to finish up with the cool stuff. He's going to finish up with the Kubernetes stuff and talk a little bit about the why you'd back up containerization, Kubernetes, and then have a look at something that's really exciting from our point of view. It's our acquisition of Kasten and what that's delivered by way of allowing us to talk about a great product called K10. So we'll take questions at the end as well. So we'll hopefully leave a bit of time at the end, 10, 15 minutes for questions. I don't know how the questions go in Dubai and the UAE. Hopefully it's a bit in between. I know that Europeans ask a lot of questions, but people in Asia don't. So given that the UAE is in the middle, hopefully we get a few questions at the end. That's enough of my bad jokes. Should I continue, Michael?
Yeah, probably
just kick it off, right? Okay. So let me get there. I want to talk about the platform first. So the Veeam platform, and for those that haven't seen Veeam in a while, probably don't realize that, we are truly a platform now. I mean, I've been at the company for nearly 5 years now. I think Michael's been for 6 years, 6.5 years, haven't you, Michael?
Yeah, 6.5, just over 6. So yeah.
Yeah. So we've been here for a while, and in that time, we've seen tremendous growth of product. Right, when we started, we had a couple of products. We had Veeam Backup and Replication, Veeam One, and some endpoint backup, and also we had a monitoring bit of software as well, which was an acquisition of ours in the early days. But since then, we've really exploded in terms of what we offer. And if you look at the platform now, it is a true platform. And the one thing about this platform is that it is built very much predominantly around the VMware community, the VMware ecosystem, riding that wave of VMware, through virtualization. This is where Veeam got its power from, right? But as we've kind of moved, as the world has shifted a little bit, we've obviously gone out of our initial comfort zone, which was, backing up virtualization platforms, VMware and Hyper-V, and we've moved into what you see here. So, cloud, SaaS, application, virtual, physical. And the physical is really interesting as well. We have a slew of agents these days, and the agents cover a number of different workloads. Obviously, from a virtual sense, we do VMware, Hyper-V, and Nutanix. But we don't mention Nutanix too much on these VMware VMUGs. Applications, we talk about the databases as applications, Active Directory, but then Michael will talk about how that pertains to Kubernetes, and then SaaS and cloud, as you would expect. But I think the real slide that shows you where we're at the moment is the fact that more than ever, Veeam is a single platform to manage and protect all workloads. Now, when you look at this circle, the way that we're going around here, we're protecting the public clouds. the agents that we've talked about, software as a service. So we've got the backup for Office 365 product. So if you guys haven't seen us in a while, and if you're using Exchange, we've got that product as well. Applications, like I said, very important. But then, the core still for us, and, while we're talking here, we're going to talk about V11. The main product is really around that agentless virtualization space. Still extremely strong in VMware. Michael and I are both very, very strong and very tight in the VMware community. We love talking at VMUGs. We've been around the world talking to a lot of different VMUGs, and obviously virtually over the past, year and a half now. In terms of our releases for 2020, if we step back and take a look, it was obviously a disruptive year for a lot of us, but I think for Veeam, it was very successful. We obviously had a plan in place. We had an acquisition event. For those that don't know, it's probably worth mentioning that we were acquired by Insight Partners in January of 2020. And the world was very good back then. And then obviously COVID hit. But suffice to say, that gave us a bit of a launching pad to be able to sort of go to the next level. And I think what you'll see over the next sort of 15, 20 minutes represents that. And then, Michael's going to talk about that next wave in terms of where we're going. In 2020, though, we had a great release, 16 product releases through 2020, everything from Veeam Backup Replication V10, which was released in February of that year, a number of different agent utilities there, Veeam Backup for AWS, which was huge, and Veeam Backup for Azure as well, and a few other releases pertaining to service providers and hypervisors as well. As we look at 2021, and this is just in Q1, we've had a tremendous Q1 where we delivered Veeam Backup and Replication V11. We delivered new versions of backup for Azure, and then a new fresh product backup for GCP. So you can see that we're covering the clouds and the public clouds, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. And then for the service providers on the call, hopefully we've got a few service providers there. We kept on releasing more integration services based on Veeam Service Provider Console, which is our managed service platform for our providers. And that's a free console that we release to our providers, built on our Cloud Connect technology, which is, underpins our communication between our tenancies, our customers, and the cloud. And it basically allows for remote management, license integration, license management, and whatnot for our providers. So that's a really strong cornerstone product of ours as well. And then, Michael, I think I got that new acronym right. Is it VDRO or VRDO? I always forget, but it was basically our old Veeam Availability Orchestrator. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah.
VDRO?
Yeah. Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Which basically is a I don't want to call it, it's basically a mushing together of backup and replication, Veeam 1, but with a sort of front end that manages the orchestration of those backups and the replicas as well. So it's an interesting product in itself. Okay, with that out of the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about V11. So V11, again, flagship release, Veeam Backup Replication, sits at the center of that platform that you saw. It's still our core product. And it's worth saying that in its 11th version, it's just had another tremendous release with, what do we say, Michael, 180 or 200 sort of features and enhancements in it. So obviously, clearly, every release that we do, and we've been doing these major releases probably once, averaging every 12 months or so, especially since I think Michael and I have been at the company. And we kind of stuck around with the 9.5 versioning for a while, but we released update 1, 2, 3, and 4 of that, which were significant releases in themselves. But obviously last year we've skipped ahead to V10. Now we're at V11. In terms of what are the top line features in V11 that we pushed, we have continuous data protection, or CDP, so low-level RPOs. We released a very interesting solution for a hardened Linux repository, which gives you immutability on that primary landing zone. We added archive to cloud capability for our object storage support. So we've got something called a Scarlet Backup repository. We now allow that to tier to 3 different levels. The first level being your primary landing zone, which is your traditional backup repository. A secondary secondary tier called the capacity tier, which is backed by object storage, which is usually S3 type of storage. So, relatively cheap, but not something you want to pump a lot of data into for long term. And what we released in V11 was the ability to have another tier out to something like Glacier, which obviously means that you can store it there forever and almost never need to get it, but just in case you can always get it back. So that's a big feature of ours. And a lot of our focus has been on object storage support over the last three editions. In terms of instant recovery, we've been working hard on improving our instant recovery technologies. That all started with our instant VM recovery, which is a patented technology that we released back in the day. It was first to market and patented. So we're very proud of that being all on software, not relying on any hardware to basically do instant recoveries of VMs. So what we did in the last version is we enhanced the back end to make it a little bit more scalable, to make it a little bit more robust within the software to basically perform better. And what we did with that is we released more instant recovery features. And in V11, we released the ability to do instant recovery of MS SQL and Oracle databases, and also NAS backup as well. So some very cool and powerful tools that you can do now to get to your data quicker, as opposed to having to sit there and wait for the recovery to happen. So that's a big cornerstone of Veeam as well. And then it's worth noting and talking about the Veeam-powered stuff that we've done with our backup as a service and DR as a service. Again, for the service providers, if there are any service providers on the call, you can obviously take advantage of our service provider technologies, Cloud Connect Backup, Cloud Connect Replication. We're going to talk about a few more features a little bit in a couple of slides as well. But suffice to say, we always have a soft spot for our providers, and we always release product and features and enhancements that our providers can take advantage of and effectively, bill out and create services to their own tenants on. In terms of the add-ons, so just running through a few more of the features of V11, we added monitoring and analytics. So Veeam got a bit of an update there. Again, I've talked about this disaster recovery orchestrator, and I've talked about, console and DRAS and BAS as well. In terms of additional backup capabilities, so we added a agent for Mac. So for the Mac users out there, it's a bit of an MVP release, but certainly still works pretty well and offers a solution for someone who's got a Mac and wants to have Veeam backing it up. So we've got that out there as part of V11 as well. We've added some functionality and some enhancements to our DG performance. So those using DG appliances can get some better capability out of that. So we're always looking to improve everything that we do in every release and add and give more to our customers through the software. Just a reminder as well that we are hardware agnostic. So we're pure software play, which gives you guys the flexibility of choice to choose any hardware that you want. And that's one of the cornerstones of Veeam in itself. In terms of NAS backup, it's something that we released in V10 and we made it better in V11 by effectively, doing some better change file tracking integration. It just lowers, when you're talking about potentially billions of files, if you can get the change file tracking better, it's going to reduce the incremental backups, less time to back up based on more files and whatnot. It's just a good flywheel there to keep that cracking. In terms of other recoverability capabilities, so again, for service providers, we added VMware Cloud Director support. So obviously being a VMUG, we love to talk about VMware technologies, and VMware Cloud Director is one close to my heart. So adding the ability there to do site-to-site replication between VMware Cloud Director sites was something that our providers had been asking for a long time. So it was great to get it into the product. And, we're not forgetting about Hyper-V. Certainly the dominance of Hyper-V has waned quite a bit in terms of, numbers and whatnot, but we've still added some functionality to do instant recovery to Hyper-V. And by the way, that goes the other way. So in V10, we did this instant recovery to VMware, which means that as long as you got a backup of any workload into a Veeam repository, be it coming from Hyper-V, whether it came from a physical agent-based machine, whether it came from a public cloud backup, you could actually recover it into a VMware environment there. So while it says there we've got that instant recovery for Microsoft Hyper-V, we've had that same technology since V10 for VMware itself. Some additional cloud capabilities. I'm going to talk about those a little bit later on, so I'll get to them later. And then some automation. And again, Michael and I have done quite a bit of presentations together, a couple of VMworld sessions, memorable ones where we focused on automation. And Veeam is still working very hard to sort of, continue to offer automation tools to our customers. We released a new API, which was the first sort of release of this new modern API for Veeam backup and replication. It's got a new endpoint. So that's something that's really exciting. And then that's kind of been built and brought into the main suite of products based on the other products we've been developing for a number of years now, which have had this modern API built from the start. Veeam backup and replication being now a technology or a base that's really 10 to 12 years old. It had some technical debt to it, and the API was one of those. So it's really important that we continue to enhance the way that people consume automation through the product, and a new modern API is the way to go. So from a VMware perspective, if I was to use an analogy there, if you think about the way that VMware modernized their API set through the VCSA from where it was in the Windows vCenter, that's kind of what we're doing at the moment to our own API set there. Okay. And just to kind of talk a little bit about the cloud features there. I mean, these are cloud features, but they're also relative to just general cloud features and whatnot. Again, lots of goodness in terms of VMware Cloud Director, scale-up backup repository that we had, added supportability for GCP, like I talked about, and also added that archive tier. I've talked about the RESTful API and the new PowerShell module of sorts. It's a first step module. It's not a fully fleshed individual module, but we're getting there. And then we added a lot of Linux love as well. I think it's important to talk about the Linux stuff because as a company, we've definitely looking to enhance the ability for our customers to leverage Linux more than Windows. So we're slowly getting there. We've got the Linux repository for backups. We added the Linux proxy. We've done the harder Linux repository as well. We've got a file level recovery, which is being enhanced for Linux as well. So you can see that we're very focused on not only the Windows where we kind of started and I guess made a name, but we're trying to always improve our Linux capability as well. And then finally, the data integration API, which is an API of sorts, but effectively allows you to mount backup repositories live to a Windows or Linux box, and then have that backup appear there as a disk where you can then access the data and do stuff with it. So that's all about the activation of data, making sure that you can do something with the data, not just have it sit there on a repository doing nothing, just giving more power and flexibility of choice for customers. So that's the data integration API. Okay, just to finish off, I thought that I'd spend 5 minutes just going into the CDP function, given that we're in a VMUG and given this is a VMware specific release for us or feature. I just wanted to go in and talk a little bit about this. So this really, as you would imagine, is all about, adding the resiliency for critical workloads and really looking at low RPOs, okay? Understanding that when we're looking at a particular set of workloads, we understand that there is a certain criticality to them. So we have to be able to categorize the workloads, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, however you want to do it, gold, silver, bronze, it doesn't really matter. But understanding that the top 3 to 5% of your workloads are the ones that you really want to replicate on a per second RPO in order to get them back to minimize data loss quickly. Okay. And as we go up the stack now, really this should be the other way, but working from the bottom up, you can see that now with continuous data protection, Veeam Backup Replication has an end-to-end policy-based control of these workloads. So the tier 2 might be your traditional snapshot-based replication where you can get 5-minute granularity depending on what storage you're using, but more likely around the 15-minute mark. Then you move into your more traditional backup, which is your point-in-time backup, your snapshot-based backup at a point in time, and that's generally taken 15 minutes, but basically is done every day. And then you can get that to a GFS for longer-term retention. And then the archive backup, I mentioned, the archive to Glacier. That's really again that long-term storage where you want to put it there almost forever and not have to deal with it. But the point being now with CDP, we've got this end-to-end approach to it. Okay. And again, just to kind of go in it, when you're planning this, when you're thinking about this, CDP really should be for your top 5 to 10% of your workloads, if that, because understanding that to replicate something with CDP on such low RPOs has side effects in terms of storage consumption, network consumption, slight CPU overhead, that sort of thing, right? Which is why you wouldn't just go and do a blanket CDP replication for all of your workloads. But that's important, categorization and whatnot. In terms of how we're doing this with CDP, we're leveraging the vSphere API for IO filtering, which has been around for a while. Started as a caching engine, and you would have remembered a few caching companies back in the day, 5 or so years ago, like Pernix Data and whatnot. I mean, they were caching engine companies. VMware had that in there, in the actual product itself almost from day dot. And then they decided to release it as a VAIO API, and we leverage the replication side of that. So effectively we plug in to the hypervisor at the kernel level, and we basically intercept IOs as they come and go. And it's done sort of in this way. So we plug in at the user world, we talk to the kernel. The driver or the filter driver is installed against the VM. And then that filter driver then tells the actual VM to send the IOs through the kernel up to the network and then through to the other side. And the other side is obviously the storage. That storage is then picked up by another vCenter server, and then the VMs can be brought on in a replication sense. So leveraging the IO filters there. And what that looks like from a sort of very, very high level sort of architecture document is that we have the coordinator, and the coordinator is the Veeam backup and replication server. We then have proxies, and the proxies can be physical or virtual. Now, the great thing about our CDP solution compared to others is that we can scale small, we can start small and build it up, because we basically scale via the proxies. That's like everything in Veeam. And if you're doing it in software, which is completely doable for the solution, you've got the ability to start small and just then basically, even through automation, deploy these proxies as you need. The main difference here between other CDP technologies that are out there with other vendors is they typically tie a data mover per host. Basically, the IOs are intercepted at the host level, and then they will basically flow through this data mover on the hosts. If you've got a cluster with 30 hosts, you might be protecting 5 VMs, but you still need to install that proxy or that data mover on every host, because that machine might move between hosts if you've got vMotion going or whatnot. So the way that we do it is we don't do that. We take that off the host, and the data movers are single machines, the proxies, and they handle the data movement between the source and the target side. The filter drivers talk to the daemon, they send the data through, it goes from source to target. It's actually as clear as mud, obviously, but it works pretty well. So that's something there. And I think I've got a few links at the end to basically have some links to get more information about it. But what we'll do is we'll open up the questions. I can see we've got a few coming through. We'll keep the questions to the end, and we'll basically talk about that a little bit later on if you have got some questions. Okay, I'm just going to finish off with a bit of a 2021 focus, and then we'll get Michael talking. Effectively, as we move through, our focus is on cloud, security, and containerization. So in terms of the security, it's really focused around immutability and really focused on how we protect from ransomware, how we protect from malicious intent or accidental deletion. And you'll see a lot of this being built into a lot of our products. We're building immutability into our products. We've done that in the V11 release with that hardened Linux repository. We did it in the V10 release with regards to adding immutability options on the capacity tier, which is that first level of object storage that I talked about. And, ransomware is something that we really believe our customers should be protected against. And immutability is absolutely that first level of defense there, more so than, education and whatnot. In terms of the public clouds, we are touching the majority of the major public clouds now around the world. So we have got solutions out there for AWS, Azure, and Google more recently, and we are iterating on these pretty quickly. So in fact, what's it been, Michael? Only say 18 months since we released the first version of backup for AWS, and we released version 3 a little bit a little while ago, and we're already talking about version 4. And they'll basically cascade down. So Google is at version 1, Azure is at version 2, and AWS is at version 3. AWS has the more feature set, and then as it cascades down, they basically start to catch up as they increment on their actual version numbers as well. Okay, I just wanted to talk very, very quickly now about Veeam Backup for AWS and talk a little bit about what came in V3. And it's really just an overview slide. So before V3, we had the ability, so in the previous versions, we had the ability to back up EC2 instances and effectively not that much else. So it was a fairly limited product in itself, but what we've got now is the ability to back up not only EC2 instances, as you'd expect, but also RDS, VPCs. We've got enhanced application consistency. We've added some role-based access control. We do file level recovery as well, which has been improved as the versions have got better. And then we've also added the ability for outposts, which I'm not sure if that's selling in any great numbers around the world, but we've got the ability there to take this and give that cloud-like experience for the AWS backup there. And then we've added some ability to exclude EBS volumes, which is an important one. But I think the key here is just showing the fact that we can recover into AWS, but more importantly, out of AWS. And this is where it becomes relevant from a VMware perspective, right? Because what you're able to do here is deploy from the marketplace our Veeam Backup for AWS appliance. You can actually manage that from Veeam Backup and Replication through a plugin, what we call integration services. And then what you're able to do is do your backups. You're able to send the backups to an Amazon S3 bucket. And then from the Veeam Backup and Replication server, whether it be on premises or wherever it is, you connect that as an external repository, and then you can see the backup, the EC2 instances in that backup. Now, from there, you can use the great Veeam technology, our mobility functionality, to be able to right-click and recover that to a machine that might be in a service provider, or it might be a local VMware server or vCenter, sorry. And you can basically do an on-the-fly conversion and have that pop up, okay? And it can go the other way, by the way. We have restored EC2 functionality at the same time. Now, where this is kind of popular, and where I'm seeing this, is when we talk about VMware Cloud and AWS. So the ability to basically have the best of both worlds, have workloads running within Amazon AWS, EC2, RDS, whatever they are, marrying that up with VMware Cloud and AWS, which gives you that vSphere SDDC, and then you're able to basically move workloads between the two fairly seamlessly. So that's just a really quick overview of our AWS product and how you can basically get workloads that are backed up into the S3 bucket from that technology, mounts it on a Veeam Backup Replication server, and then recover it into a VMware vCenter without any conversion at all. So really cool mobility aspect there. Okay, I'm done. We had to kind of rush through because I wanted to get Michael on. So he's going to talk about Kasten, but just before he does that, maybe you guys just want to take a screenshot of this. I think we'll hand out the slides anyway, but it's always cool to get a little QR code action happening. Basically, for those that want to have a look at the V11 launch, we've got a rewind there. We recently did a cloud field day where we talked about this and other technologies that were related to cloud. And then I've done a little series on VBR and console for V11 as well. So if you want to get that cracking at the same time. But with that, I'll pass you over to Michael to talk about the new world of Kubernetes and talk a little TKG and K10. All the cool acronyms.
No worries. Cheers, Anthony. I don't know if do you want to take that first question now, and then because that seems to relate. Yeah, and then I'll just share.
So which one are we here? So what are the best guidelines practice? Oh, I've lost the questions. Michael, can you read them out? I've lost them. Where are they?
Is that because I'm sharing?
Yeah, you went full screen on me. Hold on a second.
So what are the guidelines, best practices for designing a backup repository that can help accelerating instant restores and item level restores, since most of the time the backup repository is the bottleneck?
Yep. So basically, the fact now that Sober, the scale backup repository, allows you to shift we've got two modes there. We've got move and copy. So if you think about your primary landing zone, which is your traditional backup repository, because you can now shift the majority of the data into object storage, that now allows you to have faster storage, cheaper, more efficiently on the landing zone. And now we're talking about high end, high capacity SSDs, potentially the QLC SSDs. That's a real viable option now for your landing zone, because you're going to be under control. It's going to be under control because the majority of your data is going to go into the object storage. Okay, so I think that answers the question. The removal of the bottleneck is achieved by making the landing zone quicker, but that can only be done if you move and make it as economically viable as possible to get the majority of the data off to object storage.
I think to add on to that as well, Anthony, I think this is one of the biggest differentiators for Veeam, in that being software only and giving you all of the choice as to where you want to store your backups from a primary point of view, a secondary point of view. It kind of like, if you're looking to accelerate those instant restores, then you can bring Flash into your backup repository, but it's not a requirement. I think that's where you see a lot of the appliance models around like data management, data protection, where you have to buy this appliance with this amount of Flash and this amount of capacity. I think Veeam gives you the choice of, well, do whatever you need really from a capacity point of view, and have as many as you want, that then builds out that scale out backup repository that Anthony also just went into detail about. So I think it depends as to what you've got, but I think that's why we want that choice out there to be able for the customers to choose what it needs to look like.
Yeah, and very quickly, does CDP support VMware-based encryption? I'm going to say yes, Michael. I really should know that, but my first instinct is yes. But we'll get back to you just to confirm that.
And before I start, just so I don't forget, Kumar, is that shouldn't be an issue. It's nothing to do with us per se from a Kasten K10 point of view. That's going to be down to the vSphere Tanzu side of networking, but I'm pretty sure that Cisco themselves have validated designs on using ACI to drive that as a backbone network to that. So that's what I'm going to go with there as well. Okay, let's jump in. So I've got, I think, around 20 minutes, I think. But I want to also get into a bit of a demo. So we might fly through some of these slides. I'll make sure that we share them. And yeah, we want to get into actually showing you around. So as much as there's an agenda, it's like we want to talk about, well, why data management, and ultimately, and we can very, very quickly go through this, is, well, accidents still happen, ransomware is still applicable to Kubernetes, all of that stuff around everything that you've ever had to restore from as a failure scenario. Well, it's still applicable when it comes to Kubernetes. There's no shining light there to say that Kubernetes fixes the world, as much as maybe the hype and the buzz around that makes it so. Yeah, there's still challenges, especially around data management. So then we're going to get into a bit more around Kubernetes on VMware, but I'm going to specifically talk about why K10 and VMware there on around Kubernetes. Then kind of go up again to that 40,000 foot view of Kasten K10. What, why, how is it different? Why do we do it this way? And then we'll get into that demo. So first of all, and I can't see the chat, but I'd like to ask how many people are running Kubernetes in production? How many people are running Kubernetes in like a test and dev, like a playground type area? And how many people come from the DevOps side? And how many people are more traditionally the same as like me and Anthony around that virtualization world, like coming from the platform ops? We're generally interested around the infrastructure, the platform, the hardware, the storage, the networking, that and keeping the lights on. Just like get that bit of interaction going. We'll come back to that chat as well later on. So I guess the more frequent would be talking about site reliability engineers, or infrastructure admins, backup admins, cloud engineers, the people that keep the lights on, the people that have had the 3 o'clock in the morning calls about failures where you've got the developers potentially laying back and they've passed everything over the fence, and it's now the operations team, it's now the ops team's issue. And I think this is a big thing at the moment around, like, we've all heard DevOps as a culture, DevOps engineers, DevOps as a movement, if you like, where you have, and I'm probably choosing some percentages here, but it's probably a 70-30 split where you're still a developer, but you've got a 30% interest in the operations side of things, like as far down as the storage that the database lives on, but you've not come from a storage background, you don't have that say. But what we're seeing is, especially as VMware bring out Tanzu, the likes of OpenShift and other on-prem solutions, as well as the public cloud, that platform ops having to be involved, because otherwise you're just seeing another wave of shadow IT come in. So really what we're focusing on when we get to speak at these events is really focusing around that platform ops piece and where it's applicable to us as infrastructure admins, as platform operators. I've also heard, what did I hear the other day around dev data ops? So you've heard of DevSecOps. Dev data ops is another new thing around focusing on the data, more so around maybe data scientists, but also I've seen people reference that in regards to data management as well. And I think this is always the opening gambit, regardless if you've been around, like if most of the people have answered, yeah, we're running containers, yeah, we're running Kubernetes in production, no, we're not even thinking about it, we're so far away, and that kind of language is that, I think the first and foremost is it shouldn't be containers versus VMs. And if everyone goes to Google or to a search engine right now and you search for containers and VMs, that whole front page actually comes back with containers versus VMs. And I think that's already a daunting look into the future, in that, well, no, that shouldn't be the case at all, because virtualization has its benefits, as does containers. They're not the same thing. It's a bit like when you're looking to move house. You wouldn't move house on a motorbike. You'd look to get a lorry or some sort of larger vehicle that allowed you to move your stuff. And that's very similar to physical. Hasn't gone away. Virtualization will not go away. Cloud VMs, cloud IaaS, PaaS and SaaS, again, won't go away. All we're doing is we're adding more platforms to do specific or a variety of different jobs that we want to be able to achieve. So I think that's why I wanted to kind of touch on, if you're a VM admin, virtualization admin today, that doesn't mean that you're up against this new container wave or Kubernetes wave. That's not the case at all. But we've got to be aware of what's coming. And I think that's where VMware are doing a great job around Tanzu, because, well, it's one environment to rule them all. And we all know how VMware progresses, how ESX 3.5 or even earlier looked, and how it looks today. Imagine what that looks like in the next year, 2 years, 3 years as a development plan, and how we manage our VMs for our specific workloads that require that virtualization and maybe the full operating system, but also alongside that, the containerization of abstracting the operating system to be able to achieve that. So really the key takeaway on this slide is containers and VMs, or containers or VMs, but it's never a versus. Yes, there are going to be people that think that. We believe that from a moving forward, from a platform, it's going to be all about choice, and you're going to choose the right, or hopefully the right way of being able to leverage this technology for the right job. So then we get on to a bit more of data management. Obviously, that's where we sit from a Veeam perspective. And I don't think, regardless of what you've said in the chat, whether you're a newcomer to Kubernetes, whether you've never touched it, whether you're running it in production, like I mentioned, whether you're a DevOps engineer and you're completely running things around CI/CD pipelines and all of that interesting and cool new buzzwords, the challenges are still going to be the same. Yes, things get closer and things get tighter, but failed applications still happen. Accidental deletion still happens. I read an article about within Kubernetes in particular, 300 namespaces got deleted, which is fine when you've only got 300 namespaces and everything is in code, and you can use source control to be able to, or version control to be able to redeploy all of those namespaces until there's a level of stateful workloads in there, or until that 300 is only a small percentage of the overall number of namespaces. How do you know which namespaces are no longer there, as well as the stateful workload? So think of that as there's still challenges when it comes to data management, and this is one of the key areas where Kasten K10 comes in to be able to protect you against those, whether it be part of that CI/CD pipeline, but also in the more I guess the way in which we always think of protecting our data, maybe after the fact rather than on a policy based kind of schedule. So what I'm getting at here is that it looks the same. It's different but the same, as in the challenges are still there. Kubernetes doesn't fix data management. Yes, there's all the high availability. There's replica sets. It's going to make sure that data is available. Yes, you can go cross cloud and cross cluster and all of that good stuff, but ultimately that data is still your responsibility, and you still need to look after that. So that's the key takeaway. Just drilling down onto that a little bit further is, well, what do we need to actually protect when it comes to Kubernetes or containerization? So first and foremost, persistent storage. MySQL database is what I'm going to use in the demo. How do we protect that? We've got an external source pushing data into our database. Version control is dealing with the life cycle and the continuous deployment of the application code. It has no visibility and no recollection of the data within that database. There might be a correlation in terms of configuration maps, but ultimately they have no idea. And there's definitely nothing, if you were to go and make an accidental deletion, which I'll do in the demo, is, well, you can't get that back unless you've got some form of data management. Stateless, complex environments. So Kubernetes was very much that web scale approach. We're going to have our web server with everything that it needs to run that web server within the container image. We're going to spin up as many as we need, even prior to Kubernetes, to be fair, stateless workloads. And we're going to spin down as many as we need, and we don't need to protect them. Unless we get into that namespace situation where I just mentioned, and you've got 300 namespaces of different applications, different stateless services. Well, how do we then make that easy in terms of data protection? Protecting those individual stateful workloads, i.e. very much linked to that persistent storage piece. So the databases, how do we make sure that they're application consistent? How do we speak to the workload? For example, there's a lot of Kubernetes clusters out there that are leveraging things like RDS as an external database service within. Well, how do we need to be able to protect that data, whether we use Veeam backup for AWS, which is great. Obviously, it's going to be application consistent, but it's not going to be aware of the pods that leverage that within the Kubernetes environment. So Kasten K10 is kind of an overlapping way of being able to protect that workload in a more application consistent fashion. Then you've got things like load balancer, public IP, DNS, etc. That all still is very apparent in the Kubernetes world, if not more so, for it to actually be functional. So being able to protect those, and then obviously being able to recover from those. How do we recover in the fastest possible way to make sure that we can get back up and running as fast as possible? You could pretty much take a find and replace here, and I'm sure that we could relate this back to virtual machines, data management challenges that we've had and overcome over the years, and now it's just a table stakes for any backup vendor. So Kubernetes on VMware. Now, the only thing I want to mention here, and I'll do this quite quick because this is really talking about our Kasten K10 integration into VMware or Kubernetes on VMware. So obviously there's lots of options out there around TKG, TKGS, and just vSphere on or Kubernetes on vSphere. And really the point here is that we've written code jointly together with VMware around So native first-class disk support with what we're doing. Also integration into VMware's cloud native storage, so CNS on the vCenter, but then also understanding what those Kubernetes storage classes is and linking them down to the storage policy and being able to leverage them as part of our policy creation so that we're creating the correct restore options, but also obviously backing up those correct storage classes in Kubernetes. Now, that's not to say that we are unique for VMware. I'm just saying that there is integration points that we've gone out and we've created as alliance partners to be able to deal with some of those things that are related to Kubernetes on VMware. From a Kasten K10 point of view, it's very much agnostic. If it's Kubernetes on x86 architecture, then we've got the ability to protect that. So quickly jumping through this is Kasten K10 is obviously focused on protecting that stateful workload, but it's also going to give you a lot of functionality around being able to discover the applications that you have within your cluster. So we'll do that dynamically. Policy-driven automation, so you can create your policies and define what they need to look like so that any new namespaces that come in with the name MySQL or the tag or the label MySQL, they will fall into a particular policy and you'll protect it in that manner. So you've got the ability to be quite dynamic on how you protect those. I'll get into the ease of use and the simple UI without getting into the marketing points down there. I think it's going to be self-explanatory and very Veeam-like in that it's very easy to use, very easy to set up, etc. Obviously, another key part is the end-to-end security. Anthony touched on that from a Veeam backup replication, but a Veeam cloud management platform point of view. That continues when we get into K10 and protecting these Kubernetes workloads. It's not just about backup and recovery. I think just to kind of summarize this slide is it's not just about backup and recovery. That's obviously a key thing today in that people are going into this world and they're potentially let's think back to that ESX 3.5 days where it would take, you wouldn't get the whole cluster up and running in a day. It'd take some professional services. It would cost quite a bit of money if you were bringing in consultants. We're probably all consultants at one point where we were going out on site and delivering those services around that. It's also about application mobility. One of the key parts to Kubernetes is that portability. Obviously, containers are much smaller in size and in footprint. The ability to take your application from one Kubernetes cluster to another in a very quick way, from a test and development point of view, potentially a phasing area, but also just things like being able to transform and push those into a different location for a different use case. That's made super simple when we look at Kasten K10. And then also disaster recovery. Again, those challenges that I mentioned, the data management, were still the same. They still happen. And key part here, I'll just build this out quite quickly, is K10 lives within the Kubernetes cluster. So if you've got however many clusters, K10 lives in each one. It's deployed via a Helm chart. It's got the ability to leverage Kubernetes APIs, so native APIs. So that is what enables us to be managed or be included within those GitOps or CI/CD pipelines. It also looks after the infrastructure APIs. I've just touched on where we work with VMware and where we integrate into FCD support and CNS, etc. But also, obviously, there's a lot of storage vendors under the hood as well that we want to take advantage of. So it's not just about VMware's cloud native storage, but obviously all of the storage partners that VMware have as well as the public cloud. And then application consistency, those data services, those databases that, again, Anthony touched on right at the beginning, where a database can pretty much live across all of those platforms that we've touched on, whether it's RDS, whether it's virtual, whether it's physical. So having that application consistency is super important for that. And those familiar with Veeam and have been for a while, if you think about how we're natively using the Kubernetes API to be able to take those those backups in a very efficient way, where it's very similar to how Veeam Backup Replication started from a vSphere backup point of view. If you go back, it was all about agents being installed on your VMs, how VMs then got sprawled and you had a lot more VMs to now manage with those agents. You'd have the overhead of those agents that were going to be taking up a lot of network and resources on that particular VM. I'm sure we all remember those days. Then along came Veeam, an agentless approach. We're gonna talk directly to the vSphere APIs, and we're going to pull out the data in that manner. Think about that as the same way as what Kasten K10 does in a Kubernetes environment. Again, this is kind of a very similar look, but the focus here is around that data services, and this is not exclusive. There are others out there. So Postgres, Mongo, MySQL, Cassandra, even Amazon RDS, like I mentioned, is being plugged in or used as an external stateful resource, being able to have a complete copy of all of that data for recovery purposes. Distribution-wise, whether it is VMware, you can see TKGI mentioned here around Pivotal Container Service, the on-premises options that we have, but really we're just focused on Kubernetes and then the storage infrastructure underneath. Just again, a little bit of a peek into this, and I appreciate we might be running a little bit late to jump into the demo, so I wanted to make sure we got to at least this one, is that peeking into the future. So Kasten K10 can send your data to object storage. So whether that be Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, S3 compatible, that's an option. NFS storage as well. But then also in a future release will be the ability to send it to a Veeam repository in that native VBK format. And this is something that we'll be showing off a little bit more when we come to Veeam On in a couple of weeks. That gives us that ability to protect that workload into that same area that Anthony touched on, that already looks after your virtual machines, your cloud machines, as well as your physicals. So can I just get a time check just to make sure if I can just quickly jump into a demo, or are we hard on time?
If we can go over, it might be worth it.
Yeah, are we good? I'm going to go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, so the first thing to show is our documentation. So if anyone is out there that really wants to get started and get involved and has a Kubernetes cluster, regardless of where that is, best place to start is going to be docs.kasten.io. And like I mentioned, it is a Helm chart deployment, and you've got all of these different options here. In particular, let's have a look at our installing K10 on VMware vSphere. And then you've got the Helm chart to install, validate that install by watching, all of that good stuff. And then we're in a position where we're up and running. I won't actually run through that, but it's pretty self-explanatory if you're already in this world. Just to give a shout out to that is that, again, very similar to Veeam, and there's no coincidence that we're all part of the same company now, is there is a free version forever that is focused on 10 worker nodes forever. So we don't care about how many applications you have on those 10 nodes. That's a free version of Kasten K10. And then there's obviously the enterprise supported version as well. If we just take a quick look into the Kasten dashboard. So on the screenshot, you saw that was a, what do we call it? Like a light theme. I find that light theme now burns my eyes too much, so I've gone for the dark theme. And just to give you a bit of an overview of what this dashboard looks like, we have our applications. So you can see here that we automatically discovered these. You can see that I'm not protecting, well, 4 of them, but you can see that this MySQL, which is my application, I want to protect this, and I've got a policy that is related to that. So this is where we can perform an ad hoc snapshot. We could run our restores so you can see where they've come from. So here we can see that I have a snapshot. So this is actually going to be a vSphere snapshot that we're leveraging using the CNS, so Cloud Native Storage snapshot, as well as an export that is actually in this instance gone to Veeam Backup Replication, because I'm using this for a demo for Veeam On. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek into the environment of the very quick demo. Then we've got our policy. So where do we create that? And this is where, if we just quickly dive into this, we give it a name, we give it an action. So we've got snapshot. Import is a recovery from from a different location back to another. So we've got that functionality as well. And backup frequency, so hourly, daily, weekly, monthly. How long do we want to keep those for? You probably wouldn't use these this retention period of just 7 yearlies. It just stops my lab being overwhelmed by snapshots. Then whether you want to export them out to that secondary location, object storage or VBR in a future release. Then what do you want to actually export out? So do you want to just do the snapshot data or snapshot references? And then you can start to be quite granular around those labels. So like I mentioned before, this is where we can really be policy defined in that, okay, anything with MySQL as a name of an application, I need to protect it in this manner with this amount of restore points. Maybe we use labels in exactly the same way. Anything with gold, silver, bronze, we protect them in a policy that is defined in this way. We select the resources that we have, and then if we require application consistency, then we've got a location profile for those canister actions. Again, we probably won't have time to jump through that. Now, I mentioned around being native to the API. So what you're seeing here is this is an API, or this is a Kubernetes native API that we can, if I was to go into kubectl, get policy within this namespace, this would be returned. So what that means is that we can then start to use this YAML file to be able to derive what that desired state or what we need to achieve out of there. So if we were, let's say, for example, we had 10 different Kubernetes clusters across the world, but they're all running the same thing, but they're very localized. Well, I want a gold policy that is exactly the same in each location. We could create it out of using this YAML format and then spread that across all of our different environments, and we'll get the same desired state for each one and incorporate that into your CI/CD pipelines at that. Also on the dashboard, we have data. So this gives you an overview of that. This is a bit broken for us at the moment, but this is because I'm running on a pre-GA build, but you can see that it gives you an overview of how many backups, so snapshot storage that we're using for really fast recovery, object storage, and then live storage as well. So it gives you that timeline. Obviously, you'd see a lot more information if you were running this on a production system. If we scroll down, you've got activity, you've got the actions, so kind of like a last 24 look at what's going on. If we dive into settings, this is where we define those locations for the exports. So again, you can see here, Veeam backup server, NFS file store, those object storage. We give a VBR server address, repository name, credentials, pretty simple stuff. Infrastructure wise, so that where we do start looking after that first class disk or the integration with the VMware's cloud native storage, this is where we would simply add in our vCenter. We have integration into that port as well as other infrastructure types, vCenter server, vCenter user, password, and that gives us the ability to have that configuration profile and start leveraging some of that functionality with those FCD and CNS. K10 disaster recovery. So we protect ourselves, or we can protect ourselves by sending K10 itself, as well as obviously all of the applications, to a different location, i.e. if we're going from AKS or Tanzu to AKS, vice versa, we can do that. Here's the licenses. So this is where we would add that production license. Support-wise, just some information about your K10 version namespace, and if you wanted to change that dashboard setting, then you can do so here as well. Now, if I had a bit more time, I would run through and show a demo of deleting some data, restoring that data in here, but I probably am already pushing it over by 5 minutes. So, but expect to see that at Veeam On. That's obviously what we're focused on. You can see as well that we can perform restores. It's not just about the backup. Now, just to head back into the slides quickly, just to wrap up, is depending on the level of knowledge around Kubernetes or want to learn a bit more about Kubernetes, if you have access to a Kubernetes cluster, then probably step 2 is going to be a better option. But step 1 is an actual hands-on lab that allows you to walk through in a Kubernetes cluster over about 30 to 45 minutes and takes you through some steps in creating an application, a MySQL database, basically what I had in that lab, and walks you through what that looks like and actually restoring some data. If you've got your own, then you can obviously do the same, perform that Helm chart install, and off you go and play with that. Now, I will say this is still open from KubeCon. So I want to give this a shout out, is that for anyone on this call, we've got the ability to get you this hands-on quick start Kubernetes guide from Nigel Poulton, which is a really good hands-on like walkthrough lab book, if you like. And if you go and complete the hands-on lab steps on that link there, then you'll get yourself a delivered ebook as well, so that you can then follow along and walk through that. Okay, let me stop sharing. Let's see about the questions. Guess we need one session for K10. Well, that's the problem with me and Anthony. We want to turn up and we want to tell you everything that we're doing. There could be an option to do a deeper dive into some of this as well. Just quickly looking. Does K10 cover both etcd objects and persistent volumes backup? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we will protect etcd as a cluster, a non-cluster item. Again, we could probably go through that in a separate session as well, because it's not unique to any particular vSphere Tanzu or any particular flavor or distribution of Kubernetes. And then yeah, obviously persistent volumes, that's exactly what we're focusing on. In terms of the operators, so we actually have our own open source application consistency project, is called Canister, and this is based on blueprints that enable us to speak directly to MySQL, Postgres, Aurora, Kafka, like there's a long list, all on that docs.kasten.io, and that will give you that allows us to get those application consistency from that. So in terms the Kasten K10 test drive, the link that was just shared, that's not for the ebook. I'd just give you a shout out because I don't want you to get into the end of that. So it is the Kasten K10 test drive, but go with the one that I linked, because otherwise you won't get the free ebook. But yeah, hopefully I've answered all the questions. Thanks so much for sticking around for an extra 8 minutes. Hopefully that was useful from both myself and Anthony. And again, I guess the other thing, like from a social media point of view, feedback, questions, etc., hit me and Anthony up on social media. From we're always happy to help the community about anything related to Veeam or anything in general.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Anthony and Michael, for giving a wonderful session.
No worries.
And hopefully we will be anyway. The recording is there, so we will share this recording with our community members. There are a lot of people who was not available for the session. Okay, so they will also go through this, and we'll plan for the future sessions on as they discussed on Cade and all those products. Okay.
Cool. Good stuff. Thanks, all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.